The military went to Mombasa, Mamangina Drive, and did their thing. And now Mamangina Drive is... The military came to Uhuru Gardens and did their thing. Yeah. Uhuru Gardens is... The military has been at KICC doing their thing. KICC, we are told, will be in time for the Africa Climate Talks. When are they?
In September, next month.
Next month. Okay. As a build-up to that, there are several mini climate conferences taking place. One of them is taking place soon. And Michael Owuor, who is the head of development pillar and chair of the conference at the Global Center for Policy and Strategy, joins us to talk about one of those build-ups. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Eric.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to the hot seat of the Situation Room.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the welcome.
I see you're a man in... So what blues are those, Ndu?
Many blues. There I can see navy blue, there is sky blue, there is blue.
blue, navy
blue, navy blue, sky blue.
Okay.
Les
Bleus.
Right. In fact, actually, Les Bleus, the blues.
He's the blue.
He's Les Bleus.
Bas. Michael, welcome. These are the gentleman who is in a blue jacket. We'll give you the day's proverb.
Hey, that one was long in coming. Even if you do not like the hair, not hair, recognize its recognize its speed. Hair here refers to sungura, not nywele.
Even if you don't like kakasungura,
tafadhali
tambua
speed yake.
Right.
Yes.
Michael, this proverb is from where? City?
Burkina Faso.
Right.
Otherwise known as, formerly it was called Upper Volta, as opposed to Lower Volta. Yes.
What do you make of that proverb, Michael?
I would say give credence where it's due. Recognize somebody's expertise. As the Swahili say, I'm not very sure. Something gaganini, but haki yake mpe.
Mgala
muwe.
Lakini haki yake mpe.
So I would relate it to that. That despite our very many differences, there are things that each one of us is good at, and that is what needs to be appreciated.
You are good at development matters. You're a development expert.
Yes.
Right?
Try.
So what is the Global Center for Policy and Strategy?
So the Global Center for Policy and Strategy, in the acronym is GLOSEPS, is a non-profit think tank. We major mainly on research, policy research, and our work mainly is to connect the practitioners with the people who develop the knowledge and experience, and then link the two, so that at the end of the day there is decisions that are informed by evidence. So the Global Center has 5 areas that we are very specific about, and all of them are interconnected. One of which is development, the one that I have the privilege of leading. There's another one for peace and security, transnational organized crime, ethics and governance, and foreign policy and diplomacy. So we work interdependently with other state and non-state actors to influence policy.
We've been talking about climate for a while.
Yes.
And climate then also impacting development of countries.
True.
Draw that line, a direct line between climate change and the impact on development of nations.
So when you look at the journey for climate change and what we are now experiencing, there are implications with regards to how the climate affects our well-being. So, for example, just to give what comes to mind very, very fast, is in the past 2 years or 3 years, the Horn of Africa has been experiencing some devastating drought, which is related to climate change. There's also innovations which are taking place even here in Nairobi, where the city of Nairobi is transitioning the transport system from petrol-powered or fossil-powered towards electric-powered mobility, especially for public transport.
And electricity not generated using petrol.
Yes, that's
Hopefully.
that's the issue.
Yes.
That needs to be discussed and also expounded more. There's also the issue of urbanization, especially for the East and Central Africa region, where most of the populations we are seeing are moving into cities because that is where opportunities are. And then that brings with it aspects that need to be discussed. For example, how do you cater for this number of people who are coming into the cities? Are the infrastructure in a position to sustain them? And then the implication, for example, when you look at Nairobi, for example, there is a lot of stress on water. The Nairobi Water Company may not be able to. So a lot of people are really digging boreholes to be able to cover that need.
Yeah.
But the challenge is that we have situations where now, because of the extraction of water, there's a gap below, and then we're experiencing now buildings now going down because the situation is becoming more dire. So we look at climate change and aspects of development, aspects of peace and security, aspect of foreign policy. It's a whole interconnected realm that is important to the discussion. Yes.
Sure. So the world still continues to look around the issue of climate. The world is having a conversation in Nairobi in September.
Yes.
The world then comes to Dubai later in the year and has a conversation again. We're at 28 now.
Yes.
Of these kind of conversations. It's happening this year. But the thing is that the question still remains front and center, that are nations in the global south going to be able to put their development agenda on hold or at a reduced level because of the issue of climate degradation? And should they? And here we are, the very basic thing that we've spoken about, water. It's unheard of or unthinkable that in the global north, for example, although I don't like those demarcations, but okay, let's go with it for that, for the purposes of this conversation. It is unthinkable that you open a tap somewhere in Europe and water does not come out of it for months. Right? Something as basic as that happening in this side of the world, but we say, well, you know what? Perhaps we need to think about something else, because if we don't, or rather if we do, still focus on not digging boreholes, we put a strain on the environment in terms of water sources. So what do? Do you develop and sort out your people? Or do you say, let us heed these global conversations as a nation? That's where the conversations are today.
Yes.
What should happen?
So, just to paraphrase and looking at what is happening, when you talk about climate change and the agenda that is being set, both in the so-called global north and global south, what is coming out clearly is that different nations have different priorities, which in essence guide the way they relate or they prioritize climate change issues. So in a nutshell, I would say that the way to go is both to look at efforts to collaborate, but also at the same time look at what are the priorities of each and every country. Looking, for example, we talk about climate change, especially in the global north, and there's the emphasis that there's need to decarbonize. And we look at, for example, Kenya, we have the project in Turkana, which we're having issues financing. And also our brothers in Uganda seem to be having a problem with theirs, especially with regards to financing, because of what is called decarbonization. But when you look at what is happening, especially with the advent of the Russian-Ukraine war, and the need for alternative energy sources, you're finding that Europe is now prioritizing and even asking other countries in the Gulf to produce more oil.
Yep.
And at the same time, also encouraging conversations with Algeria, Niger, and Nigeria to have the Trans-Saharan pipeline as an alternative to Europe. So at what point do we say that climate change is taking priority? So that is the conversation that needs to be happening. But as it sits now, the perspectives are two. One is that national interests influence agendas that are taking place in the national and also international space, and also that is dictated by domestic priorities. So no country is going to waylay or put aside their domestic interests to be able to pursue, but there's need to collaborate and appreciate that there are distinctions of differences and priorities, and how do we go forward to find a common ground.
But that is the conversation, though.
Yes.
That there is a lot of influence that is being placed on nations in the geographic global south.
True.
Are being asked to reduce on the impact of their imprint on the climate. That is, they're actually being asked to do that. And I feel that it's clear what the clamor is coming from the South again, saying that, well, this is great, but you've had an opportunity to develop, as the ones who are asking us now. And even as we speak, your industries continue to contribute the majority in terms of percentage of degradation. So when we come together for these conferences that we're going to see in rapid succession, over the next few months, over the next few weeks. President Ruto said a couple of weeks ago as well, you know what, we're having a lot of these meetings, we're having conversations, but we're not doing anything. It's about time to start doing. So even as these conversations are taking place today, taking place tomorrow, is there now a look around what our needs are in terms of development and how they can work in congruence with protecting the climate and the environment? Shouldn't that be where the conversation should be, not necessarily pandering to the whims of the global north?
And that is the conversation or the direction that we at the Global Center are trying to direct the climate change conversation. That first of all, climate change has a more broader impact than even development itself. Actually, it's cross-cutting across every aspect of life. That is the first conversation. And then second conversation is, what are the areas of synergy or congress that, as the East African community, what are the points of commonalities that we can put our heads together and say that this is what needs to be done. So that is the conversation that we are expecting today and tomorrow, especially from the representative of the conference that we're having, from different countries in the East and Central Africa, to be able to get perspectives, as you said, with regards to what needs to be our priority in the global south, especially East and Central Africa, and secondly, what can be done, and thirdly, as people go and plan for the African Climate Summit and later for the COP28, what should be the agenda that needs to be pushed together as a continent. So the idea is that what we are doing at GLOSEPS and what is it will feed into the African Climate Summit, which is supposed also to feed into the COP28 summit. So that is the whole idea around it.
So as I get it, this is like a regional conversation.
Yes, it is.
Bringing together countries around the Horn, around East Africa, around Central Africa. And then thereafter, we'll have the Africa conversation. This is expected to feed into the Africa conversation next month. And the Africa conversation then feeds into the global conversation. Have we had before conversations at regional level on climate that are led by the region, not hosted by the region, but being conducted by people from outside the region?
Yes, those have been there. And even when you look at the African Climate Summit, there are those conversations that people are having that is this really an African conversation, or there are other forces behind it? So for the Global Center for Policy and Strategy, we are trying to make it more indigenous. Like, what can we as residents or citizens and experts in the East and Central African region bring to the table with regards to creating a platform for this discussion from indigenous folks, from indigenous institutions, and also from government and non-government agencies, so that at the end of the day, the conversation and the policies, that conversation that we're having, are informed and directed by the priorities which are happening in the East African space. So that is the whole perspective that you are looking at, that instead of waiting for support from other countries, what can we do? What are the challenges that we have? What are the solutions that we can propose? And what can we do together and individually?
You know, I'm always perplexed about just the amount of talk that we have around this same subject. Because we have a conference, we talk, we meet. No, we don't. Those who have a conference talk, meet, and come up with the resolutions and wait for the next conference when they'll meet, talk again, come up with resolutions. The people whom climate change affects and how it is they understand this concept and its ramifications, whatever it is that exists is presented on their behalf. In these conferences that people have, how often are these indigenous people's voices heard? Meaning, you have this community that comes from this particular place, maybe a semi-arid place, a community that has understood this message of climate change and have done something to mitigate against it because they have understood what needs to be done. How often are these voices heard? But more importantly, how often are the decisions, the declarations, the determinations that are made at these conferences implemented so that the people who actually live their lives on a daily basis within these so-called ecosystems where climate change is wreaking havoc, how many, year in, year out, how many situations, how many places, how many geographical areas can you point to and say that these people have understood this message and they are taking the right steps to mitigate against it or to ensure that this doesn't happen? Because if you're talking about mitigation, it is not difficult to communicate.
Yes.
It's also not difficult for people to understand. And it's something that can be done. How much of it is actually done?
So for our perspective, yes, with regards to this conference, those are the conversations that we are trying to bring on board. One of the key presentations that we are having is actually from an individual indigenous population. We're having a lady who is from Makueni, who will be doing a presentation about her experiences and also what she's doing to be able to mitigate climate change, especially in her agricultural field. And also she's having the position of a village advisor on agricultural resilience against climate change. So those are the experiences that we are looking forward to having in this conversation, so that at the end of the day, it's not only experts who are giving the opinions of people in government, but at the same time, having people in the communities giving the experience. Secondly, there is also invitation on presentation from practitioners in the Kenyan space. For example, for tomorrow, we'll be having a session with representation from Basigo, the institution that is leading the mobility of green public transport, to be able to get their perspectives of what is actually happening on the ground, what are the challenges that they are experiencing, and what are the opportunities that need to be explored, so that at the end of the day, it's not only an academic or an intellectual exercise. At the end of the day, it's also supposed to be practical, so that it's be able to inform action in the ground without really theorizing so much.
City.
You know, the discussions are all good and well. How long have we been having these discussions on climate change, really?
Oh, I mean, COP is at 28 this year, no?
And if we were to just take a casual look at the progress that we've made, in terms of awareness, people are now far more aware than they were before. People understand. But the thing that I find interesting is why it is, when we have these conferences, we seem to think that the solution lies in the West, that they must be the ones who lead the charge. Yes, I've heard what the President Ruto said, I've heard what other African presidents have said, but I'm more interested in what they're doing, not what they have said. Because in each and every of those governments, they have ministries whose functions relate directly to climate change, whether it's agriculture, whether it's environment, whether it is wildlife, whatever the case may be. But more importantly, if there isn't a plan to ensure that the consumers of all these things, who are the citizenry, are in tandem with it, part and parcel. Case in point, let me look at, say, wildlife conservation in Kenya. Do we have a situation where we can proudly say that every effort that is known to mankind is being made to ensure that individuals who live and who neighbor wildlife have understood the need for them to participate in conserving wildlife, and that they are doing so effectively? Because if that was the case, then why is it that we keep seeing the numbers of our wildlife reducing significantly? There's always a talk of some species increasing. Why, for instance, then do we not see enough efforts being made to reclaim land in some parts of the country which are semi-arid, which were not always semi-arid, but over time, the story is the desert has encroached more and more and more.
Because of human activity.
Exactly, and that our arable land is getting less and less and less and less. Now, I would say that is something that governments can actually address. Indonesia has a very interesting phenomenon and a very interesting problem. In Jakarta, it's a sinking city. The boreholes that you speak of, they dug them. That city is sinking at the rate of 11 to 12 centimeters per year. Sinking, as in... And they're now trying to figure out how best to solve this problem. Now, we learn from others, undoubtedly. There are many situations that we haven't gotten to, but we can see what will happen if we do certain things. Now, from a Kenyan perspective, what is it that we are doing? I know what we've done, especially with renewable energy. I'm very aware we're a leader. But what else have we done that we can look at and say that we don't need to be lectured by the West about this matter of climate change? We are way ahead of the curve, and we know exactly what we're doing. And our people have embraced the idea.
So, those are very insightful ideas from City. What we are seeing, and that is the conversation that we're trying to encourage, is that even when we're looking at the challenges that is happening in the communities, for example, wildlife, it's a whole interconnected system. What keeps appearing on, for example, on the news is, for example, that there is human-wildlife conflicts, and all of them are over resources. What appreciation we are also trying to bring on board is that there is a whole other factor that is in play, which is criminal in nature. For example, we may see maybe animals or elephants being the task going in Savo. Maybe because they're encroaching somebody's place or something else. But when you start now looking at these incidents, quote unquote, you find that there are other players who are involved in this business who the climate change agenda is just like a cover-up for them. And those are the conversations that we are trying to bring into light, that this is not, for example, limited to animal and wildlife conflict and human conflicts. It's also a transnational organized crime in nature. It's a syndicate by itself. So those are the appreciations that we need to have and bring on board. Secondly, the other issue that we're also trying to have conversations on is what are the bringing to fore, what are the practical interventions that communities are putting themselves without really the interventions of government with regards to climate change. So when you look at the Kenyan ecosystem, there is a rising case of individuals and even communities transitioning from what we have as the normal LPG gases to methane, because as Kenya, we are more or less an agricultural economy, especially in the rural areas. And our resources, firewood and the rest, are being depleted. So what are the alternatives that are there that are being put in place to be able to address this? So it's the talk is happening, but even at the conference, we'll try to bring or create that space where individuals and communities with practical intervention and practical solutions can be given the space to go and say that, hey, this is what we are doing, and this is what even other communities that are facing the challenge that we are having can do the same with or without the intervention of government. So that is the broad nature of conversation that we like to encourage.
But then beyond that, because even as we look at Kenya hosting the Africa Climate Talks, Kenya taking a leading role in the global climate talks, are we looking backwards and seeing what the government is putting in place to support those interventions by local communities? When you talk about, for example, more and more communities going methane route and saying, we have cattle, we can actually just do biogas, we can get these kind of solutions for ourselves. What is it that the government needs to do to encourage and support these local communities? If you look at the past dry spell and how it left so many trees that had just been logged because people wanted to go into firewood or whatever, what is it that is being done to encourage the planting of more trees beyond the talk of, we have a target of X number of trees by X years? What exactly, in terms of practical policy and programs, are governments doing to help communities adapt to climate change?
There are two aspects to this. One is the creation of the enabling environment to enable individuals and even organizations that want to undertake climate change interventions to do that by their own sake. And government should be able to facilitate that. For example, and this is what comes in mind. For example, if you have individuals who want to transition from the Kenya Power main grid to their own solar power, there is conversation that transition needs to be encouraged rather than impeded. What we are hearing from communities and also practitioners is that there is impediment, either intentional or not intentional, which government puts forward in its efforts to raise finances. For example, because these are easy for government, these are easy targets for collection of revenue. Most of the technologies, for example, solar technology, is import, and because it's easier to tax that, you find that those interventions or those solutions are taxed and become expensive. So it even inhibits that transition. So the conversation that is happening is that instead of government putting retrogressive action or policy, government should be on the forefront to enable that transition by making these solutions available and even affordable.
So is the government doing that? Are governments of the countries that you've invited for this conference doing that?
I will not be in a position to speak on their behalf.
Not on their behalf.
Yes.
From an observation point.
From the observation point, it's a mixed bag of there are current countries which would say, quote unquote, they are doing it, or experiences will say, oh, this is what we are doing, especially when the big picture is presented. But when you go into a community, the communities and individuals paint a different picture, say that these are the challenges that we are facing in terms of access, in terms of transition or to these technologies. So it's a mixed conversation, and that is why it is important to have those conversations where each and every actor on board is there, and the community says that this is what happened, and then government brings their point across, so that there is congruence, that the differences in experiences can be harmonized for a common way to be set and pursued.
Do you think that's what I'm pushing? If you look at so Kenya, we pride ourselves in what percentage of our grid is green? Is it
90%?
Right? All that is green because of the sources that we have.
Yes.
There's hydro, there's wind, there's solar, and then there's the Naivasha. It's geothermal, right? We have Africa's largest wind power farm.
Yes.
Up there in the north. In Kajiado, in Kipeto, we have another large wind power farm that's coming up. But then all these technologies are not local. They're expensive imported technologies. When you talk about harvesting our geothermal, it's expensive imported technology. Solar, expensive imported technology. So what is it that government of Kenya should do to encourage more and more of development of our own technology, so that we can go into, even when we go into 100% green, we are 100% in control of our technology?
I would say,
or at least,
yes,
to a large extent in control of our technology.
I would say there are aspects which are valid. For example, most of the technology that we have in place are imported, and that is correct. Whether it's wind, whether it's solar, that is correct. There's also the situation where the technology themselves are supposed to reduce the cost of electricity or the cost of energy, which is an issue currently being debated, of why some energy sources are cheaper than others, and why others are being inflated as it were. So those are also conversations that needs to take place. With regards to indigenous technologies, I think at this particular point in time is that there is need to encourage the local innovators or local innovations, so that at the end of the day, we have technology which we can pride on and we can control, to be able to advance the conversation or even adoption of climate resilient solutions for Kenya and East and Central Africa.
You know, if you look at what once upon a time were emerging economies, and right now they're actually very strong economies. You can think of India, you can think of South Korea, what they call the Asian tigers. The thing that got them to the position that they are at, they didn't necessarily invent the wheel, but they understood what the West had done. They simply improved on it and made sure that it served their purposes and met their needs as the needs were. Now, when we see these countries producing, say, their own cars, you find the Indians producing their own cars, you find the South Koreans producing their own cars. The truth of the matter is that it's proprietary technology, yes, but that technology has been in existence for a long time, from the times of Gottlieb and Daimler. But it's a question of improving on it. So even with us, I do not see in our universities, I do not see within the government plan, I hear talk about this hub and the other hub, an innovation hub, an ideas hub. I hear all that, ICT hub. But out of these hubs, they ought to have come some technology, some proprietary, that we can say, you know, this is what we've worked on. Not that we invented it. Something came to us, but we've worked on it so that it actually now suits our purposes and it works for us well. Now, same thing with climate change. When you explain to a local mwananchi about climate change and why it's imperative now, with the county system, you see, urban drift, the movement of people from the rural areas to the urban areas, used to be major towns within the provinces. Now it's everywhere. So people are moving towards town now. There is something that is definitely happening when you consider that we have a population that just keeps shooting up. This pressure on land will increase. This conflict, it's not just with animals, with the environment, will increase. So now, unless a conversation is had so that we don't wait for it to explode before we start saying, what were those solutions we thought we might? Meaning, you manage it before we actually get there. It's a conversation that we are the ones who must have. We cannot wait for someone to rapporteur this for us.
That is correct. And I'd like to borrow for a conversation that took place in this space about the challenges that the private sector and even innovators in Kenya face when they bring on board local manufacturing or local solutions, and that is also unique with regards to the manufacturing and also increase of uptake of technology, whether imported or imported, but made within our landscape. The cost of, for example, setting up the industries that are supposed to be able to roll out, for example, this technology for Kenya. For example, if you're doing solar, or if you're doing, for example, the biogas, those are technologies that can be done within the Kenyan ecosystem. Actually, the Eastern African ecosystem. But the conversation which becomes more and more clear is that when the private sector, who are leading these initiatives, with most situations without the direct intervention of government, is that there is blockade. With regards, for example, the number of certifications that need to be had, the number of costs that needs to be sorted beforehand, the issue of, for example, licensing and so on and so forth. So even in that space of encouraging our own capacity, there are conversations that need to happen with government, and say that as we transition, and also as we pride ourselves as having this percentage of energy being clean, we can do more, but at the same time, it's not possible to do that more if there are impediments placed on local actors to uptake solutions.
By the way, there will always be impediment. If you're talking about the commercial space or industrial space, you'll be fought. Yes. It's not as though you're going to suddenly invent something and they'll happily allow you.
Come in and,
Like, do you know when solar power first came into being? In the 1960s. Do you know why it has delayed so long before now people can talk about solar power? The early inventions were bought up by all companies because they saw this is direct competition. They knew, they understood it, so they fought it. There's a space that one must live in the realm of reality. None of these things will come easy. Even with government, it's not conversation. They must be pushed. Pushed, literally. If they're not pushed, they'll talk about it, there'll be a plan. You'll even have a ministry. And that'll be it.
But let's be talk. And that's I'm focusing on the governments.
Yes.
Because the governments are the ones who are hosting these climate talks. The governments are the ones who speak at the global climate talks. The leadership of governments talk about all these things. Our government has now taken that front and center role. To say, we are championing climate and climate talk. Is there a Marshall Plan in this country that says this is where we are going, this is what we are going to do in the next 15, 20 years to adapt to climate and also mitigate further effects of climate? This is what we are going to do as we push towards 100% green energy. This is what we need to do to make sure that we can then more easily invest in green energy. It's costing us so much money importing technology to get geothermal from the ground. God gave us that thing, it's there. God gave us wind, it's there, but we can't harvest it. God gave us the sun, it's there, we can't harvest, we have got to import. And we are paying and expatriating so much money as we just tap into this God-given green energy. Is there a plan? A proper plan that says, this is how we shall get there? When China is now leading the globe in 5G, it just didn't happen.
No.
They had a plan and they implemented their plan.
Yes.
And so and this is the thing. Isn't this where the conversations in this neck of the woods should actually be around.
Yes.
Making these technologies that are going to have a twin effect in terms of development domestically, and as well as making sure that on this climate grid that we're all protected. Shouldn't those be the conversations that we're having, instead of harping constantly about, well, let there be a fund where we can tap into to do 1, 2, 3, and don't tell us what to do all the time, but here we have an opportunity to develop these things for ourselves. Why don't we do them? Shouldn't that be the kind of conversations that are curated, especially for those countries that live on this side of the pond?
Yes, that is the conversation that should happen, and that is the conversation that we are encouraging to happen at this juncture. When you look at what Eric asked, is there a master plan with regards to climate change? What we have is essentially what we call the national development contribution towards climate change, what we were supposed to do. And when you look at that document, it's supposed to be for 5 years, 2018 to 2022. There's a new one that is supposed to be developed, I think, with regards to COP28. When you look at that document, what we call the master plan that leads government interventions with climate change, it's usually with regards to our economic setup. That this is what we're going to do in agriculture, this is what we're going to do in manufacturing, we are going to encourage clean energy for manufacturing. There's encouragement, for example, to plant trees, the encouragement to do paperless. That is what is contained in the national, the NDC as it were, our contribution towards climate change. And the conversation that we are trying to encourage is to move from there and lead our own solutions and encourage that space for that to happen.
Very good. Michael, thank you very much for joining us.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.